I,
The
I would
Egyptian,
I will disappear around 7:20 around there and then come back later. Just carry on.
all right.
Okay.
The
Go ahead, Sister
Egyptian
Tapa.
Revolution. Yes, yes. The Egyptian Revolution, January 25 to February 11, 2011. In Egypt, President Mubarak made the mistake of declaring January 25, 2011 Police Day, a celebration of the police who had been brutalizing and terrorizing the people. It was too much to countenance. Drawing inspiration from the outside of Ben Ali in neighboring Tunisia, a group of young pro-democracy activists called the Revolutionary Youth Movement decided to replicate the accomplishments of the Tunisian experiment, and they made Mubarak's Police Day their day of rage. The established opposition parties in Egypt had been feckless, divided, and constantly feuding. But these new plotters and organizers were from the youth wing of the opposition movements. The following account of their strategy is culled from the February 11 edition of the Wall Street Journal. Can we scroll up, please? Thank you. The protests began by a group of about a dozen young people, including representatives from 6 youth movements connected to opposition political parties. Oopsie. Groups advocating labor rights and the Muslim Brotherhood. They met daily for 2 weeks in the cramped living room of the mother of Zid al-Alimi, a leading youth organizer for Mr. El Baradei's campaign group. They chose 20 protest sites that were usually associated with mosques and were located in densely populated neighborhoods. The idea was that such a large number of scattered sites in different parts of the city would strain security forces and draw large numbers of people. The group called publicly for protests at these sites, but did not make public the 21st site they had chosen. There were other organizers as well, including Wael Gomnim, the Google executive. However, the revolutionary youth movement seems to have oh, gone too far. Seems to have masterminded the uprising at Tahrir Square. 3 days before the protests, the youth plotters slept away from home, fearing that the police might pick them up in the middle of the night. They also stopped using their cell phones, fearing that they might be monitored, and used phones belonging to relatives and friends instead. Small teams scouted out the secret 21st site, the Badak Al Decor neighbors Hais sweet shop. It was in a working class slum area. The organizers were depending on the participation of ordinary Egyptians who had no access to the internet to make the protest a success. On January 25, security forces predictably deployed by the thousands at each of the announced demonstration sites. Then, 4 field commanders of the youth group converged on the 21st site and mobilized the people to march unchecked by police to Tahrir Square, Liberation Square. The occupation of Liberation Square was a huge victory for the revolution. A visibly disturbed Mubarak sent his police goons to beat up, tear gas, and douse the protesters with water cannons. They did not budge. Then he sent in the military, a column of tanks. But as in the Philippines in 1986, the protesters formed a human chain to block them. Mubarak next sent F-16 fighter jets to douse the crowd. It did not work. Things began to turn in favor of the protesters when the army chief announced that the Egyptian military would not fire on its citizens. This announcement emboldened the protesters, who carried some of the soldiers high on their shoulders. A desperate Mubarak tried some of his old tricks. He suddenly withdrew the police from the streets and organized thugs on horses and camels to beat up and shoot the demonstrators. Some of the captured thugs were found to be carrying police IDs. When he shut down the internet, young Egyptians found alternative ways of communicating. On January 28, 2011, Mubarak sacked his government and formed a new one. He hastily announced new political reforms, pledged not to seek re-election in September 2011, and denied allegations that he was grooming his son, Gamal, to succeed him. The coconut boogie again. He indicated to Egyptians that he would like to finish his constitutional term and said that if he left, there would be chaos because the Muslim Brotherhood would take over. But his runs were greeted with the chants, leave, leave, leave. And Mubarak, your plane is ready. On January 29, sorry, yes. On January 29, 2011, Mubarak appointed a vice president for the first time in 30 years. Threats were made against the street protesters, but yet more people came to Tahrir Square. When it became apparent that the Mubarak regime was playing for time, I sent a message to pro-democracy activists via Twitter, Facebook, and email, telling them to ratchet up the pressure by taking control of the state's television, as in the 2005 Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. The airport, as in Kyrgyzstan in 2005, in Bangkok on November 27, 2008, and Parliament, as in Hungary in 1956 and Indonesia 1998. On February 9, protesters pulled a feint. They announced plans to seize state television, which was across Tahrir Square. When security forces deployed heavily to guard it, protesters changed tack and marched to the entrance of the Parliament building. On February 10, in a highly anticipated speech, Mubarak announced that he would not step down and would remain in office until September, when his term would end. The crowd was enraged and vowed to show up at the square in even greater numbers. The military, ever attuned to the demands of the protesters, pushed Mubarak aside. On February 11, he announced that he was stepping down and handing over power to a supreme military council. Tahrir Square applauded in one giant jubilation and celebration. In all, over 300 lives were lost in the violent upheaval.
Wow,
Yeah,
very interesting here.
very
There's a lot
interesting.
of tactics of the protesters. There's also Mubarak tactics to survive. And there's
Yeah.
a lot that's going on in this Egyptian scenario. Maybe any of us can share what they think in regards to that.
What has impressed me is that I mean, we're talking about combination of the old and the young. The young across the different parties defied all the old guards. So you get the young people in the opposition parties not acting in cahoots with their leadership, but it was the young amongst themselves, strategizing and organizing to do what the older people couldn't do or wouldn't do. That's impressive, very impressive. And for me, the second point is they understood the enemy. They understood exactly how the enemy worked and how Mubarak had conducted himself previously. So the fact that they were meeting in a home, the fact that they announced scattered meeting points and kept one secret as the final weapon is very strategic. I'm impressed, very impressed. I think I'll stop there for now.
Very interesting, sister.
Mm.
I think I like what you're saying. Sister Chisomo, what do you observe?
It's the same. It's similar to what's happening now. When I look at my country, the way, because in Malawi it's different, let's say, from Kenya and Zimbabwe, in that the young people in Zimbabwe and Kenya are more educated, so they come with educated information and how to use it, how to apply it. Whereas my people, it's just lived experience, observations, and they've actually used that on the ground and beat the politicians, literally beat them. And it was a combination of the diaspora and people inside that it just worked. And they got the results they wanted. And it's just fortunate that this old guy, works very well with young people. He always had. But it's just that the young people he was working with in the past were so power hungry that they were continuously sabotaging themselves. Had they left it to him, because he's a very good um, recruiter, put it that way, because he would recruit these young people from different sectors of the industries and bring them in. But once they're in, then they start fighting. Then they start, you know, fighting amongst themselves to be next to him or to be the powerful one or jealous of each other. And they'll fall out and they'll drop out. They go out, they start their own parties, and the parties have never been successful. And then they want to come back. And now he's telling them, no, you can't come back after the problems you caused. So yeah, so at the moment it looks like he's going in the right direction, but he hasn't got long. And he's tried so hard. His appointments were very slow because he really wanted to make sure he's putting people in the right places to deliver what he's trying to do. And people were kind of happy with the appointments because, again, like him, when they chose him to say we want that one as the president, they were also saying, for example, when it came to appointing the Speaker of the House, people got involved and they said that one. And he listens. That one. And then you bring up those people to contest. And the one that the people wanted is the one who is now the speaker, is now the one who is the home secretary, is the one who is now. So the appointments are going so far, they're going well, but there's something about us that never works. That never works. And because that has now happened, people in the other parties are now flocking to join this party, even people from the last government. They are flocking to come here. And they've had to plead with them to say, can you wait until we finish structuring ourselves? But they want to go in early so they can also have positions. Other people were, oh, we don't want to do alliances with you. We want to do this with you. And those are the troublemaker. Where did they go previously? Why are they coming back? It's just greed. They are not up to helping or anything. I don't think they've recovered or they've repented or they've changed their mindsets. They're just troublemakers. So whether it's going to work, whether things are going to change, whether people have now realized politicians can be misleading, like what happened in the last elections. And now they're saying, oh, now they're pleading with this one to say, oh, can you take action against people who did A, B, C, D? And I'm thinking, you didn't think it was wrong at the time. Why do you want to lump on it on him as well to sort that out? You started it, go and sort it out yourselves. So I don't know, yeah. So intergenerational participation is really good because you pass on the wisdom, you pass on the whatever. The older people then learn what the young ones want or how they do things and whatnot. For example, now he said, oh, don't worry, because people must speak out, people must say what they want. And they're busy writing him letters to say, oh, why don't you elect so-and-so to become such and such? And so he said, now that you've said you won't be listening to our phone calls, can you make sure that the whole social media is now monetized? Because in Malawi, it's not. It's now monetized, which is good because everybody's now on it. If they earned money, they won't be stealing. They won't be doing all these bad things. They'll be on top. They're on all over social media, but not monetized. They have to do it, get it from either South Africa or all these other countries. So hopefully he will sort them out. Hopefully. This idea of taking young people to go and farm in Israel, to go and work as maids and potters in the Arab world, and it's completely useless when you've got land that's sitting idle and it's divided among these, especially the left government. They just took land upon land upon land, brought in a lot of foreigners to give them this land. Why didn't they give it to these young people? They had these programs called, what did they call it? Mega farms. Why didn't the young people get involved in the mega farms? And then they said, oh, the mega farms, you must have 20 hectares. Hectares, not even acres. Hectares. Just making sure they've locked out everybody but themselves. So, well, then come this government, they've stopped the whole program. And now they're stuck with whatever they borrowed money. If I start telling you what they were doing, it's going to take the whole day. Anyway, let me stop here. Are you
Thank
there?
you, Sister Chisomo. Thank you, Sister
Mm.
Chisomo. You know, to me, I'm looking at very interesting perspectives here. Give me, uncle. I'm looking at very interesting perspectives here. In regards to the tactics, you see, they call it successful revolution, and see how it started. The youth protest, they push, and the young people actively use tactics. And you see, they're using digital, and where there was no information, they use traditional means. And look how they coordinated themselves. They announce their strategies that you're going to be here, and then they hide one. Then they go down there manually to mobilize people. People goes to the street. The president called them to calm them down. They keep moving. So I think these are people who have already know what they want, and they know they are what you call the reducible minimums, and they were ready for it. It costed them life. We are being told that probably Tanzania have lost more than 700 youths in 3 days or 4 days. But here they hired around 300 people, young people who lost their life. But again, sometimes you wonder, why must it go all this route just to remove somebody from power? Why should somebody stick to power to all this long?
This
And
is
of
it.
course, we know.
Killing somebody to just for power. It doesn't make any sense.
So I think the biggest thing we are learning is tactics here. Or you remember the Tunisia thing was also about the young man who burnt himself. Remember that?
Mhm.
And now the Ghanaian thing was about the economy and those who went for protest and the rest. So I think there's some few things we are learning in the process, which I think is encouraging. But also, yeah, I just want to us to maybe get to
Can I just
what
mention
the
just a little thing as well? What my
yeah,
observation
please,
in my country. So when
please.
people were going for nominations to become MPs or whatever, we had 600 independent people standing as members of parliament. 600. And about 200 from this party, the strongest party that's won now, and about 80 something from the previous
Sorry, sister.
government.
How many seats are there in your parliament?
We previously, that last government, we previously had 223. Now it's 230 something, going on to 40. They split the provinces to have more MPs because they thought they were going to win. They thought they were very good at rigging and it's going to work. And it didn't. And out of all those people, 600 plus 200 plus whatever, do you know only a third are returning MPs? The rest of them are new. People did not even elect them. They just dumped them. So everybody is new and young. So whether these young people are trustworthy, that's another question. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think what that brings us to is ideology, because we're saying these young people need to have the correct in quotation marks ideology that's going to give us the end result that we want. Because the fact that they're young does not necessarily mean they're going to go in the direction that we as Pan-Africanists might want. And also, what I've observed from what we've read is that the military, one of those arms, remember when we were talking about defeating dictators, I think there were about 4 or 5 things or prominent institutions that would need to take sides with the ordinary people in order for a revolution to be successful. And in this case, it was the military. It was that decision that was made by the military that made it possible for the youth to go on. And also the behind the scenes advice given that to the youth that they needed to now prepare to take over the TV, to take over parliament, to take over those things, which then means if we're going to anticipate that we're going to have a revolution, there should be people who are holding the ideology flag, if I might call it, and are able to give the youth advice. Because youth has exuberance, youth has the energy, but sometimes they lack the experience or the foresight to then think of what they're going to do. So what you have here is, for example, Ruto, together with the world at large, seeing the Kenyan youth going off and trying to anticipate who's the leader. They couldn't work it out, and we couldn't work out who the leader was on the ground, try and direct this uprising. And I think it was that loophole that made it not as successful as it would have been. So our position should be to try and work our way into the professional bodies that have been talked about, not just talking about youth, but trying to identify important people within institutions that are subtly talked to without even talking about revolution, but people who have got the ideological mindset to then understand what is going to happen so that when things start happening on the ground, you can almost count on certain people within, the Traores behind the different institutions who can come up and raise their heads above the parapet to support the people. So
That's what
we've got our work done.
that's what happened in Malawi. There were certain figures that were then prominent within the movement, because it ended up to be just one movement. But there were people that then became kind of the leaders, and they would release videos every 3 times a day. And so there were certain people who were heading the movement in the country and outside. And we knew how they were, and the names and whatever. Some people were faceless, some people didn't mind, they put their faces out, especially those outside the country, they did. Those who were in the country, some of them did. And then they would get beaten up and stuff like that. But, and all those people who were beating people up have been picked up. They're in cells at the moment. So people are pleased with that. Yeah, no, they organized themselves really well. There were people who were leading or voicing out what everybody is saying. Oh, can you tell them this? Can you also tell them that? So there were a number of them and a lot of them. So it worked out in the end.
I
Right.
think it's very important that we look at some of the very interesting subheading that's following is actually why some revolutions succeeded. I think it's very important that you look at it so that we can then join this conversation to what we'll be discussing when you look forward to the next conversation. I think let's look at this because we have looked at 3 scenarios. We have looked at Ghana, we look at Tunisia and Egypt. So let's look at what they say some of the reasons why they succeed. So anybody, Sister Tapua, will you be able to state it for us?
Yes, I could still read for you, but before we read, can I just ask us to bear in mind what we as Pan-Africanists label as a successful revolution?
Thank you for that.
Because,
Thank you for that.
yeah, because
I think
we need,
it premises on what I was discussing initially, whether change
yes,
in leadership makes it a revolution.
yes, yes. So although we're getting pointers here, we need to continue to wear our cap to say, for a Pan-Africanist, would you say this is a revolution? What should have happened or could have happened to make it a successful revolution from our point of view? Because this is the author's point of view. Okay, I
And I
will read.
think Sister Tapu, I think you are raising something that I need also to stress on a bit.
Mhm,
One is that I don't know what happened after Mubarak was removed
mhm.
and
There was
who came in.
and they were kicked out.
Because you see, one thing is that if young people lose 300 of their lives for what is called a revolution, just to get Mubarak out, and it's the same thing that's going on in Sudan. No, Sudan, I listened to I met some of the team from Sudan, the SPLM team, and
Mhm,
look at what typically happened in that scenario. So there was a Sudan revolution. The young
mhm,
people went in the street. They protested until al-Bashir was out.
mhm,
Now, when al-Bashir was to be out, there were clear information that al-Bashir should go to ICC. Remember that?
mhm,
Then, when the youth succeeded to remove al-Bashir, what happened? They created what you call a transition government by military. So the militaries got in.
mhm.
Then, the military said that now al-Bashir will be under house arrest, not taken to face justice for his criminal activities, but to
Mhm,
tell us that now he's going to be under house arrest.
mhm.
Now, did that what the young people in the street who lost their life, is that what they wanted?
No.
Now, is al-Bashir being in house arrest, they can call that successful.
Mhm,
Now, what happened is that, see, you know, the army of Sudan got in, and then the what they call the Janjaweed, they call them the RSF,
mhm,
came into agreement because there was now like a military and a paramilitary thing. So
mhm.
if the government is going to be under transition of military, no, let the militaries work. Now, when the militaries
I'm
take
off,
over
I'm
power,
off for a few, I'm off for a few minutes.
okay,
That's
sister.
okay. Mhm,
Now, when militaries take over power, Sister Tapua,
mhm,
well, it's the civilians that went for the protest.
mhm.
Now, did the civilian went for the protest to give power to military?
No.
Now, when military came to power, did they do anything tangible? What they did, they started scrambling between themselves. So the
Mhm,
RSF, because I'm told the arrangement that was agreed initially is that then the government should have uh, the two military heads as the leaders,
mhm.
one civilian who was the prime minister.
Yeah.
And then the army felt that this civilian should be removed. Now,
Mm.
first of all, why do you give a civilian to be in a government of military? Do you still think you and that civilian can make anything tangible? Or is it just to lure the citizens to believe that then they at
Ye-
least are part of the government?
Yes, I think by doing that, the military was giving a nod to the people who had put them in power. Although by their very nature, I mean, they then behaved accordingly by kicking the civilian out. Because you cannot have civilian and military at the same time. I think they were just trying to buy time. This is why I'm
Now, what
asking.
happened?
Oh, it's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, my brother.
Now, what happened is that there was now a conflict between the military officers,
Mhm.
and that's what brought the breakaway of the Janjaweed from the army of the Sudan.
Okay.
Now, there are other now forces that come in to take advantage of that. But
Mhm.
today, if we are to sit down with the young people who are in the street of Sudan to remove al-Bashir and tell them
Mhm.
that they did a successful revolution, do you think they will accept that?
No. No.
And that is now the question you're asking, Sister Tapua.
Mhm.
Success to who?
Yes. And what is it that we expect to see after the revolution? Because revolution says we're changing, and it's not, revolution is not about changing leadership. It's about changing leadership, which should be reflected in the change of lifestyle of the people. Because it's the lifestyle of the people that they're protesting against, and they want a leader who will lead them to whatever place they want to go. So the fact that we now have the military in position, how does that make it a success? I mean, look at Ibrahim Traore, for example. We can now start saying that revolution, I don't know whether to call it a revolution, was a success. There's change, there's tangible change, there's a definite change in direction, and there's a definite change in tone and in what's happening on the ground. And that we can start to say is indication that there is a successful revolution. But being a Pan-Africanist, for example, I've got my ears to the ground to make sure that I listen and check this new leader. Because whilst Traore is doing well today, sometimes power corrupts, absolute power corrupts. So we need to make sure that whilst we're going in the right direction, we continue to have the results that we want, the freedoms that we want, the controls and restrictions that we want, bearing in mind the problems that they have up there in terms of security. But that, for me, that forms a successful revolution. Once people's lives begin to change on the ground and everybody can see the difference.
I think I want to agree with you a bit, Sister Dakwa, because if you look
Mm.
again, the example you're giving, one is that whether you want to call the Burkina Faso revolution or a coup, or whether a coup is a revolution, is something else.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
unlike other examples we are having, the masses went to the street to protest,
Mhm.
which means the civilian wanted a change. In
Mhm.
Burkina Faso, probably the civilians wanted a change before, but
Mhm.
here is whereby a military officer takes the step to remove a bad government.
Mhm.
Now, one thing is that that's a different scenario than Sudan, where the people are the one who go to give their life, and the military come in to be a transitional authority.
Yes.
Now, as you're saying, the biggest thing that we must analyze is before people say Mugabe must go, they had a reason why they had to say Mugabe must go.
Mhm.
And until we judge the implementations of the triggers or the reasons,
Mhm.
we cannot judge the success of a revolution by just removing Mugabe, but
I
by
know.
ensuring that what fundamental issues made you to say Mugabe must go are implemented. And therefore, the revolution is not against the persons. The
Mhm.
revolutions are always against the systems, because the systems are what come with programs, and programs are what make people feel dissatisfied and are ready to protest those programs. Either call them policies or whatever you want to call them.
This is
Therefore,
why Mhm. Sorry, but go ahead.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. And therefore, it is very fundamental that change should be viewed not in terms of individuals, but in
Mhm.
terms of what and not who. What are we
Mhm.
fighting for? Not who are we fighting against?
Mhm.
So, for example, look
Yes.
at I'll take you back to Kenya's situation just a bit.
Yes.
In 1952, and prior to
Mhm.
that, in 1948 and 42, when a group of Kenya called Mau Mau, as you know them today,
Yes.
they were calling themselves Kenya Land and Freedom Fighters.
Mhm.
Now, you know, their fight is very defined in their name.
Yes.
They are fighting for land and freedom. Because when the white man came, just like what they did in Zimbabwe, they created white islands.
Yes.
By white island, it means you dispossess me of my land so that you own it.
And throw
So
me
I'm
somewhere
going,
back.
yeah, so I'm going to the forest to fight so that I can get my land back. You don't give me freedom at all. So you introduce the heart tax, breast tax, all those tasks you wanted. And it's like you have chained me to carry some identification card on my neck, and that I'm not free enough to move to some spaces, to eat in some hotels, to travel in some means, and all that thing. So you are curtailing my freedom. So I'm going to give my life so that I regain my freedom. Now look at what happened. It was a 6 to 7 years war in the forest. And you know, it's not that the forest people won anything for the white man to walk out. But when they killed one of the last leaders, who is called Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, in 1956, the forest group was starting to surrender. So 1956 is 6 years before our independence in 1963, which means the forest revolution alone did not produce the independence, because the last soldier was killed 6 years before independence. Now, when the colonial masters then groomed their puppets to be the presidents, the people who fought in the forest, up to date, never got their land. So, what is successful in that?
Yes, that's a big question. Because in Zimbabwe, we have a situation where people are beginning to say Mugabe was better. There are people who are saying we were better off under Smith. And when you start hearing people say that, it brings question mark. It actually makes us to sit down and say, what did people die for? If the current people who are living post this revolution wish they could go back, that's an indictment on the whole thing called revolution. This is why I sometimes feel that Zimbabweans have just become complacent, because they sacrificed so much during the war, because a lot of people were affected. And now to get a Zimbabwean to get into the street to protest, it's worse than pulling teeth out. Because people are asking, what is in it for me? Because what they see as the result of the war of liberation is the war veterans now forming an organization to say, give us this because we fought the war. And they've forgotten about the people. The land question was not addressed. And yet, to the outside world, they give the impression that the land question was addressed. The land question was not only about whites owning the land or owning the majority of the land. It was also moving people into what were called reserves and kind of throwing them into the dead end land where nothing can be grown. The people are still there. We are still there in dry areas, in arid areas, in places where there is no hope. And the laws during Smith still stand today, where, for example, even in those reserves, the law says someone can have mining rights on your land. You can live there. It's called a reserve, which means the government owns it. They can move you anytime. You have no right. And by the combination of title deeding and giving people title deeds and the African way of owning land, there's just so much confusion. So are we saying the revolution was successful? Because I used the term we were given independence. And I continuously want to use that phrase because whilst we fought, we did not have an outright win. Because the colonialists are so focused on what they want from us, the moment they see it sliding out of their hands, they change the tune and change the dance and make sure you get a bit of what you want, but not all of it. Not the Traore way, not the proposed path by Kwame Nkrumah, because that was taking the lollipop out of their mouths, and that they will not stand. What we have here is a halfway house that continues to feed the West, that continues to satisfy whatever it is they need satisfied at our expense. So as Pan-Africanists, what revolution are we talking about? If it's not a revolution that unites Africa for the sake of Africa and develops Africa and feeds Africa and protects Africa and her descendants around the world. I think that's where we need to focus on. Because if we focus that way, then we've got the energy to continue fighting. If we feel like we've arrived, then people will say, where do you want to take us? And what are we going to do there? What's the problem? They won't even see what the problem is. Because little Malawi is protecting Malawi's corner, little Swaziland and South Africa is doing its own thing. They're happy where they are. And until we are happy where our brothers are, the ordinary person in each of the country is happy, then we have not had a revolution.
But
Anyway,
can I
I'll
just
stop.
make a comment there?
Yes,
Mhm.
Sister Chisomo.
The people I'm waiting are not here yet. Yeah, so I keep hearing young people now asking, are we really independent? They don't even go as far as talking about revolution. They are
Mhm.
now questioning, are we really independent? If everything is controlled by this Mzungu, that Western country, this Western country, where is the sovereignty if 60% of the budget is run by United States, United Kingdom, Europe, China?
Yes. Can I just add in somewhere there? I mean, something about, this is why, for example, it was so, blatant that you had foreigners sitting in a budget meeting. Is it the budget parliamentary meeting in Kenya? What were they doing there? What was that? Oh, sorry.
No, but
You can
Sister
go ahead.
Tapua, no,
Yes.
Sister Tapua, let me come in, Sister Chisomo. Sister
Mm.
Tapua, you're ignoring that. Before any country in Africa makes a budget,
Mhm.
and one of the former advisors to the State House once said that before any African government makes a budget, that budget proposal must be submitted to Americans and the EU embassies and ambassadors who must check and scrutiny.
Okay, I'm off now.
All
Okay.
right.
Who must
Mhm.
check and scrutinize whether their interest is part of the document before it is submitted for parliamentary discussion and approval.
Mhm.
And imagine that is not only in Kenya.
Mhm.
Every budget proposal process must start with budget proposals being passed to the foreign military or foreign embassies for approval. So you wonder, then what is their interest? And that's why in Kenya, they went extra mile even to be very adamant to come and sit in the parliaments. In some
You
other
know what my
countries, they don't sit physically, but they sit the
Mhm.
presidents in their embassies to discuss with them.
Mhm.
Presidents are summoned
Mhm.
with their ministers in those embassies to discuss
Uh-huh.
what they want in the budget.
You know what I would do? I would turn that statement around where you're saying, what do they want? Why are they sitting in our parliament? To, why are we allowing them to sit? Because the statements that we have here are referring to the same scenario. Here we've got someone making a budget, another person checking on it. It's the prerogative of this person who's made the budget to either give it to the one party or not. For us, we're so blinded to think we're independent when we actually are still subjugated to these guys. And they make sure that the ordinary person doesn't know. And they make sure our leaders stand up in front of them, sloganizing, saying the white men went, we won the war, this, that, and the other, we're owning the land, victory is certain, and aluta continua, and all that. It's all a facade. It's just a lie, a big lie. This is why I'm saying, if you're going to be truly independent, you're going to go Traore way. We're not saying we don't need friends. Yes, we can talk about what car you're going to buy with your friends or what type of house you're going to buy with your friends, but they don't have a say. They shouldn't even be shown it. We should be doing what we want. It's our country. So I think we need to change this thing about independence, because even Nkrumah could see that Ghana being independent without everybody else teaming up to be together, that independence would be meaningless. And if you are saying that, what we have here is not independence. It's a partial, maybe halfway house or fighting break where we've been boxing in the ring and we sit down and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. He's lost one tooth and all that. What are we going to do next? But we need to really sit down and fight and strategize to fight and wrestle, because they're not going to give up, because we're not independent. I'll stop it.
I think that's very important. So let us look at some of what they call the triggers, because I think we have then read what they are saying, then you put in context what you believe.
Mhm.
So they say that why some revolutions was succeeded, and this is what the author is saying, that a careful study of the causes of these revolutions and their author's own experience reveal that though the nature and circumstances surrounding despotic regimes may be different, 9 main factors or principles can be isolated. And the key principles of factor 1 is the trigger. The second one is the instigating group. The third one is the receptivity of the authoritarian regime. And the fifth one is for democratic change. The fifth one is the nature of the despotic regime, whether it's a military, junta, or civilian. The auxiliary and the helpful factors, the nature of the opposition strategy, time factor, cultural connection, and demonstration effects. Now, they say that the successful revolutions usually began as massive street protests by the youth, often university students, that caught both the government and the established opposition political elites by surprise. Now, the trigger was often steep hikes in taxes or in the prices of basic necessity, like in Ghana and Poland in 1988, or even Sudan, or some crude attempts by a despot to perpetuate himself in office, now either through a fraudulent election, manipulation of the constitution, or some bald-faced attempt to impose a new political order in which military dominated. Think of Ignatius Kutu, a Chempong of Ghana, or even Gafar Mohamed El Nimeire, of Sudan, even Ferdinand Marcos of Philippines, or Eduardo Shevardnadze of Georgia, or Viktor Yanukovych of Ukraine, or even Pervez Musharraf of Pakistan, and even Ashkar Akayev of Kyrgyzstan. Now, the receptivity of the authoritarian regime to democratic change also influenced the character and the course of the revolution. While the regimes were willing to accept change, the revolutions tended to be nonviolent, peaceful, and of short duration. And such was the case with the former Soviet republics, which formed the Commonwealth of Independent States, and the Color Revolution, with the exemption of Romania and Yugoslavia, which were more violent and protracted. The former Soviet republics broke away peacefully from the former Soviet Union because the communist apparatchiks had already accepted the need for reform. And as we see in 1985, for example, Mikhail Gorbachev had introduced what he called glasnost and perestroika, which is restructuring, which resulted in the signing and singing and the Velvet Revolutions. Similarly, Africa's village revolutions were successful and peaceful because the ruling elites had accepted the need for reform to reform their ramshackle political system, even though there were few street protests. Now, however, where the autocratic regime was recalcitrant or unwilling to accept reform, revolutions turned confrontational and bloody, and street protests were brutally crushed. Examples are including the East Germany in 1953, Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, China, Tiananmen Square, Romania, Ghana, Georgia, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, Ethiopia, Lebanon, Pakistan, Zimbabwe are examples. Now, equally important was the nature of the despotic regime. Was it military? Or the military varieties tend to be more ruthless than its civilian counterparts. This distinction is important because the strategies required to fight a military junta are different from those needed for a civilian regime. We can recall that it takes an institutional to fight another institution. Now, for example, the civil service, the judiciary, and the media which include the civil servants who went on strike in Ghana, the judiciary went on strike in Pakistan, and the media in the form of FM radio stations became active in Ghana. The most potent weapon against military junta is a civil service strike. Shut down the civil service and any military regime will collapse. There are not enough soldiers to replace civil servants. A civil service strikes paralyzes the government and, as in Ghana and Sudan, can lead to appellate coups. But new military rulers then come under intense pressure to return the country to civilian democratic rule. And it happened in Ghana, 79, Niger, 96, Nigeria, 98, Ivory Coast, 2000, and Guinea, 2009. Even then, auxiliary factors can be critical when the ruling regime is adamantly resistant to change. Among these helpful factors are in the following. One, the unity of opposition forces. No single individual, group, or political party can fight an entrenched dictator alone. all alliances of opposition forces are needed to unite against a common enemy. This cannot be emphasized enough. Further, the opposition must be broad-based, not confined in urban areas or restricted in certain professional, religious, sectarian, or tribal groups. And the message must be very clear: freedom. It's not a cause to be monopolized by a sectarian group. In Poland, for example, Solidarity was broad-based with 9 million members. Such was also the case in successful revolutions discussed. Now, another thing is the aid of auxiliary institutions. In the 1980s, the Roman Catholic Church played an instrumental role in Poland, thanks to the influence of Pope John Paul II, and in the Philippines, when Cardinal Archbishop of Manila, Jaime Misin, had the people to go to the defense of the rebel officers, and they responded. And the media, especially independent bloggers, was crucial in the color revolution in Czechoslovakia, Georgia, and Ukraine. In the Philippines, the role played by Radio Veritas, Radio Bandido was widely acclaimed. We have already noted the role played by FM radio stations in Ghana. In the Philippines, President Francisco Nemenzo stated that without Radio Veritas, it would have been difficult, if not impossible, to mobilize millions of people in a matter of hours. Similarly, an account of events said that Radio Veritas, in fact, was an umbilical cord to whatever else was going on. Now, I might want us to pause a bit. We might pick it up because it's a long conversation, but let's just pause a bit and come back to what they are explaining here. These are these key elements that are 9 that you're going to look at. And sister, you can just share your general thinking on some of these triggers. Because I think, and I can start a bit from what I'm thinking, by saying that these were what makes a revolution successful. One, you have agreed that we are not in agreement or together with what is the definition of a revolution. And therefore, the triggers are also sometimes not true. You see, like in Kenya, there was a finance bill that became a trigger. The group that were coming in as instigating group were the young people. But look at the reception from the government. It was a civilian government. And look at helpful factors they got. The opposition using the former prime minister came in for their help. Look at our strategy as the Gen Zs. We were leaderless, and therefore we didn't work together with the opposition government, and the opposition joined the government. So working with various movements as individuals because we were leaderless. But the time factor was very important because we were actually protesting when the bill was to be presented in Parliament for financial discussion. So it was relevant. Look at our cultural connection. We are all generation same. Actually, millennials or Gen Z. So there's a lot that we are sharing together. And what was the effect of that? So I think the effects, not in terms of removal of a person, but the effect to the protestants, that's what now the definition of a successful revolution to me. But yes, sister, you can come in.
Yes, I'm looking at these 9 factors that, because for me, the trigger, for example, should be something that the sitting government or leader is not expecting. Because if they're expecting it, then they can mitigate against it, and it becomes more difficult to execute. So whilst it's impossible to totally operate under the radar, the trigger must be something that the opposition party is anticipating will happen. So the opposition parties must always be in readiness and must read, it's like reading the tea leaves to see where the storm is heading and what is likely to happen. So there's always that anticipation that needs to be in place, and also thinking strategically. The instigating group is also very important, because if it is political, if it is a political party, it's easy for sitting governments to throw people in behind bars. But if we're looking at the Egyptian situation, where its youths across several opposition parties, and youth in most political parties are not the most prominent, it's the leadership that is prominent. So that makes it difficult for dictators to deal with. So if we're going to execute a successful revolution, the instigating group must be varied. The membership must be varied. It should be impossible to isolate. And then when we're looking at the receptiveness of the authoritarian regime to democratic change, it's almost like what happened in Kenya from my point of view, where because Ruto wants to be seen as democratic, he couldn't quite, initially rather, he couldn't quite come out and stamp out what the young people were doing. And I think I remember, if I remember, I tend to be corrected here. There was some direction that was given to the military people to shoot, or the commander, and he said, these are not our enemies. These are our children. We're here to defend our country. So you can see that there's got to be an element of the regime or part of the institutions accepting the democratic process. Because in a lot of the demonstrations that happen in many countries, it's part of the constitutional right for people to demonstrate. So in a lot of the countries, you find that if the civilian leadership struggles to go against the revolution once it gets underway, because they then need to have the buy-in of the military. And then number 5, auxiliary and helpful factors. What has come to my mind here is, if Zimbabwe, for example, stands up for dictators in other countries, actually actively goes out to support and inaugurate them, what this means for the opposition is the opposition has to be prepared. And just like during the War of Liberations, you found workers around the world, workers' unions got together around the world to support other workers in different parts of the world. So we're looking at semblance of what was happening with Kenyans trying to support Tanzanians, or Zambians trying to support Tanzanians, but it needs to be in an organized way so that the youths in the different countries are ready and strategically aware of how they're going to get involved. Because if they're drawn in without a strategy, or if they're drawn in whilst exposed, then it becomes difficult. I think I remember reading, I'm not sure what the circumstances were, but I remember reading somewhere about the Kenyans who crossed over into Uganda to try and support Bobby, is it Wine? Yes. So it's strategizing in an intelligent way without necessarily exposing yourself, but without also not giving up because you're afraid the powers that be are more powerful. And the number 6 there is also interesting, the nature of the opposition strategy. The opposite, I think in a lot of situations, what I've discovered is because of the nature of democracy, and you were talking of the number of parties that are intending to take part in elections, it's just that fragmentation. That fragmentation alone, if you possibly added up all the votes that went for all this fragmented opposition, then the majority. In other words, whilst the person with the highest number of votes or the party with the highest number of votes is deemed to have been elected, I think it should be done the opposite. If you do not have the majority of the vote, not just you've got the highest vote, but if, for example, you have 30% of the vote and the other 70% or 60% is scattered to different parties, that means you've lost. And I think I'm one person who's not for democracy as we come across it. And then time factor. We've got a sad situation.
Can I just come in on the majority win stuff? That's what triggered, that's the argument they raised in our last election, not this one, but the one before, that triggered a re-election. Because they realized that this guy will keep winning with these 30-something, 40-something, without really making half the votes. So they started pushing that one. But the rest of them didn't want him. But 70% didn't want him. So they started pushing on that one. And then they turned around, colluded with the judiciary, and the judiciary then turned around and said, by the way, we were doing it wrong. It should have been 50+1. Majority means 50+1. The person has to win 50+1. So everything we've been doing since 1964 was wrong. That's the only way they were going to beat Mutharika. So they said, so we need to do a rerun.
Yes.
So that he must win by 50+1.
Okay.
And
Because
then they knew that although he won't get 50+1, he will still get the majority. So what they did is what you're saying, that they reversed it. The rest of the parties then came together. About 9 parties came together when they did the rerun. So it was all the votes from all these parties that they put together and said, we have now beat him.
Yes.
That's how they went into power. So although Chakwera was the president, he was not the one who actually won.
My sister, it's not, for me, it's not just the 50+1. I know Australia makes it a legal obligation to vote. You'd better turn up and spoil your vote. Because if we're having 30% of the population going to vote and your majority is of 30%, what does that mean? In as much as the population is obliged to pay taxes, they should also be obliged to vote. And it should be a criminal offense to not turn up and say, have your say.
But then by doing what we did, saying, okay, although he's won by 38%, let all the rest of them come together. Well, they didn't actually say they should come together. To do the rerun, the rest of them must come together, form an alliance, choose one leader who became the guy who just went, Chakwera. Choose one leader, and then the next guy will become the second contestant, meaning he would have run this year and not Chakwera. It would have been the other guy who got killed. He got killed over that. So they came into an alliance and got this guy to become the president, which means he still did not win by the majority. Do you see what I mean? He did not, because the voters from all these other parties never voted for their person. They then voted for somebody who was imposed on them. And that was the result. The whole thing just collapsed before everybody's faces. And that's when they
Yes.
thought, we made a mistake. Let's go back to the other guy and start again.
Hi,
Fortunately,
sister,
he
can I
got back.
ask something?
Yeah.
Yeah, because for me, number 7, when we're talking about the factors, the isolated factors that the circumstances surrounding despotic regimes, and how these factors help a successful revolution. Time factor is critical. A time factor is so critical because things must happen when they should happen, because you can't give the dictator time to strategize and change and confuse you. And so you've got to have subcommittees and committees. You've got to have disparate groups discussing different things and coming up with strategies that will support whatever aim you've got. There needs to be nimbleness if we're going to defeat dictators. Because this, I mean, just think of the protracted wars that we're having in Africa, where we don't even remember when the war started. We even forget some of the events that have happened because there's just so much that's been piling on. And then the dictators also know that time is critical. This is why they quickly act. And this is why, for example, for the Western powers that were interested in the struggles in Kenya by the Gen Z, they started offering scholarships to try and dilute whatever it is that the young people were doing, because they dangled a carrot in front of the leaders and some people to distract them. And then you've got the cultural connection. For me, it might look trivial, but it's really important that Zimbabwean youth relate at a different level, which is not political, to Zambian youth, to South African youth, to Kenyan youth, to Mozambican youth, so that when time comes, you don't even need anybody to say to you, this is where we're going because I'm going to stand with my brother. There's got to be that element, which means that we need to forget the Berlin borders and start working for African youths across the Berlin border in order for them to take action and stop the nonsense that these grown-up people are putting across. And the last comment for me on demonstration effect. The Egyptian example for me is a good example. These guys went to Freedom Square and sat there. There wasn't as much destruction of private property as we've seen in some of the demonstrations that we've seen across our continent. And then they were able to identify strategic places that they needed to take over. And they did. So the pointer for us is, if we're having a demonstration, we should know that we're not just heading to parliament, but we've got other things in our pockets of the institutions that we need to take over. Especially today when we've got the net and the internet, and we know that it can be pulled down. What alternatives do we have? Because that's what happened in Tanzania. The effects of the demonstration were dampened because we could not see the pictures, we could not see the news that had driven and informed the world of what was happening. So whilst these are circumstances surrounding the different despotic regimes, they're also pointers to us as Pan-Africanists about the things that we need to watch out for and who we need to work with and at what point. I'll end it for now.
Thank you, sisters, for this evening. We've had a very successful engagement. We'll look further to other factors that have been listed here in our next session. But I think we are very clear from where we are standing and where we are coming from and our foundation as much as we engage in this text. So yes, I think we'll bring it here to an end because it's already time, 2 minutes past our time, and we started late. But we look forward to continue this conversation next week, unless there's any other thing, burning issue for now. If there's no burning issue, we can bring it to an end and then we meet next week.
Yeah, no burning issue. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Now, my only comment would be that the wars, to me, is always between the people and the politicians. So slowly, people are rising and defeating them. But you get people like Ruto who are just impossible. And now we've got the lady in Tanzania, but she's going to have a very, very hard time running that country. If you're going to do things by running away, just like our one did, he was always running away. He had no control in the end. Thank you.